Good afternoon, folks, and welcome back to the Bible in 365. Today is day number 38, and we are taking a look at Leviticus chapter 22 and Leviticus chapter 23. Y'all know the drill. Let's get started. All right, folks, so our reading today picks up in Leviticus chapter 22, and it discusses essentially making offerings in God's guidelines about receiving them. So the Lord speaks to Moses and tells him to tell Aaron and his sons how to show respect with regards to all the offerings that they make to the Lord. And so essentially amongst these are several rules, and one of the rules that God gave regarding offerings was that any person who is deemed ceremonially unclean should be turned away when he goes to make an offering to the Lord. So you had to be ritually pure and clean in order to make an offering to the Lord. So anyone who had a skin disease or an infection, like we talked about in a couple of episodes ago, had to be turned away and was not allowed to eat from sacred offerings. Now, regardless of how or why the person has become unclean, he's not allowed to take part in these traditional offerings. Now, the day after he's given some time to fix himself, to become ritually clean, he could return to the tent of meeting, and there he could partake of the food of the offerings. Now, he can't eat any carrion prior to visiting the temple, or once again, he will be unclean. Now, here it is also very important to note that there was no exceptions. So the priests had to follow these rules as closely as possible, and they couldn't make exceptions. If they made exceptions, the penalty was death. So essentially, if they know someone and they're like really good friends with them, and the friend's like, hey, but can you make an exception for me? Boom, that priest is dead. No exceptions. So the priest had to be sure that only those who were eligible to take part in the rituals would do so. So if any unclean person took part in the ritual by mistake, the priest had to make restitution. Now, the chapter ends by talking about sacrifices that are unacceptable to God, and essentially an unacceptable offering would be one that had a defect. So God would not accept a deformed or injured calf as an example. If the offering was sick or looked like something was wrong with it and wasn't acceptable, then this was also displeasing to God. So essentially it's kind of like you were bringing a weak sacrifice, since the animal would be the one that the owner really didn't want. So you're supposed to bring your best before God, not your worst. And so God only wanted the best of the herd. He wanted the healthy, in that which essentially was a sacrifice to give up. It's not like giving God your seconds. It's giving him the best of the best. And that's all he would accept. All right, folks, moving forward to Leviticus chapter 23. Here in Leviticus chapter 23, we see that it addresses feast, Sabbath, Passover, first fruits, making amends through atonement, all these different types of things. So it begins with the establishment of holy times. So annual feasts, which would draw crowds, and these feasts could not take priority over the Sabbath. So all business had to cease on the Sabbath, even though there was feast going on. So he established the Sabbath as a day of rest and as a day of spiritual relief from sin. Now, we also see rules regarding Passover. Passover was a 7-day feast, and these days were to be spent in meditation, praise, and praying unto God. And the Passover was to be in the first month and on the 14th day. And it was supposed to begin right before sundown. Lastly, within chapter 23, we see some other festivals and feasts. It talks about the festival of unleavened bread, which was during the Passover. The people were to refrain from working on that particular day, and they were supposed to bring sacrifices to the Lord for 7 days. Also, there was the festival of the first harvest or first fruits, and this involved bringing God, once again, your first fruits of the harvest before using any of it for any other purpose. So God gets the first of the harvest. He deserves the best. And then the festival of the harvest was very similar to this idea. They also had the festival of trumpets, the Day of Atonement, the festival of shelters, and each one of these had an important purpose. And God wanted the people to keep these times holy by bringing offerings and refraining from work. So essentially, festivals were a time where they were meant to be holy and spend time with God, resting from work, representing sinlessness and rest from sin. All right, folks, so it is here at the end of chapter 23 that our reading ends for tonight. Please join me tomorrow as we take a look at Leviticus chapter 24 to Leviticus chapter 26, ending in verse 13. All right, folks, as always, God bless.